The flames dance in the darkness, consuming everything in their path. The old photograph curls at the edges, the faces of the Fenwick family slowly disappearing into ash. This is how it always ends. This is how it has always ended. For over 200 years, the Fenwick family line has terminated the same way, in fire. My name is Julian Croft, and you're watching 13th Hour Tales. Tonight, we uncover the cursed history of the Fenwick family, where each branch of the family tree is destined to be consumed by flames. Before we delve into this harrowing tale, I must warn you, what you're about to hear isn't for the faint of heart. The story of the Fenwicks isn't just about death. It's about a pattern so consistent, so terrifying, that it defies rational explanation. If you're watching this in the dark, perhaps now is the time to turn on a light. Just make sure it's not a candle. Our story begins in 1792 in the small coastal town of Saltwind Harbor, Maine, a town that no longer exists on any modern map. It was here that the first Fenwick, Elias Fenwick, established what would become one of the wealthiest shipping families on the eastern seaboard. The Fenwick name would come to be associated with prosperity, influence, and power. But beneath the veneer of success lurked something far more sinister, a pattern that would follow the family for generations to come. The Fenwick Shipping Company was built on the back of Elias's ruthless business acumen. While his competitors struggled with the unpredictable nature of seafaring trade, Elias's ships always seemed to find calm waters. His cargoes always reached their destinations. His profits always exceeded expectations. Some called it uncanny luck. Others whispered of darker arrangements. I've spent the last 3 years tracing the Fenwick family history, poring over forgotten documents, interviewing distant relatives, and piecing together a puzzle that spans centuries. What I found was a pattern so clear, so undeniable, that it sent chills down my spine. The Fenwick family prosperity always came at a price, and that price was always paid in flames. Let's start with Elias himself, the patriarch. Born in 1761 to poor farmers in rural Maine, there was nothing in his early life to suggest the wealth he would later amass. His parents died of tuberculosis when he was just 14, leaving him alone and destitute. By all accounts, he should have followed the same path as countless other orphans of the era: servitude, hardship, perhaps an early grave. Yet by 25, he had somehow acquired enough capital to purchase his first ship. By 30, he owned a fleet. The records of how exactly he made this dramatic reversal of fortune are suspiciously absent. The only clue lies in local church records, which note that young Elias disappeared for exactly 1 year after his parents' death. When he returned to Saltwind Harbor, he was different, more confident, more driven, and in possession of a peculiar ring with a black stone that he was never seen without. I found a diary entry from Reverend Alistair Finch, dated March 12, 1791. He writes, "Young Fenwick's success continues to confound. The man seems touched by divine providence, though I confess a certain unease in his presence. His eyes hold a knowledge that belies his years, and when he speaks of the future, it is with such certainty that one cannot help but wonder from where such confidence springs." I asked him once about the curious ring he wears. He merely smiled and said it was a reminder of a promise made. When pressed further, he would say no more. Diving deeper into the archives, I discovered an account from a local fisherman named Silas Croft. In his personal journal dated October 1777, he describes encountering Elias during that mysterious year of absence. "Saw the Fenwick boy today, where no Fenwick boy should be. He was standing at the edge of Whisperwood Forest, conversing with something in the shadows. I dared not approach closer, for the air around him seemed to shimmer with heat, though the day was bitter cold. When he turned and saw me watching, his eyes reflected the setting sun like polished copper. I fled and did not look back." This testimony is particularly intriguing because the Whisperwood Forest that Croft mentions was known locally as a place of ill repute. Colonial-era records indicate that the indigenous peoples of the region avoided it entirely, calling it the place where the fire spirits dwell. Early settlers reported strange lights among the trees and unexplained warm spots even in the depths of winter. By the time Elias Fenwick returned to Saltwind Harbor, the forest had already claimed the lives of several settlers in mysterious fires. I've interviewed a direct descendant of the Pennacook tribe that originally inhabited the Saltwind Harbor region. According to their oral tradition, Whisperwood Forest was once the site of a sacred ritual that went horribly wrong. Their ancestors had attempted to communicate with what they called the fire that lives between worlds, a powerful entity that could bestow blessings. It was a place of warmth and protection, but the ritual was interrupted by European settlers, breaking the careful boundaries that had been established. After that, the entity became unbound and hungry. The tribal elder told me, "Our people knew to leave offerings at the edge of the forest. Never meat, never blood. The settlers ignored our warnings. They hunted in the sacred woods. They spilled blood on hungry soil, and the fire that lives between worlds began to take what was not freely given." Most historians dismiss these stories as superstition, but the historical record shows an unusual number of fire-related deaths in the Saltwind Harbor region from 1640 to 1790. What's more, a British anthropologist's journal from 1758 describes a stone altar deep in Whisperwood Forest, surrounded by a perfect circle where nothing would grow. The anthropologist noted that the altar stone showed evidence of extreme heat, portions of it actually vitrified, requiring temperatures far beyond what ordinary wood fires could produce. Elias married Isolde Thorne in 1793, the daughter of a respected local physician. They had 3 children: Gideon, born in 1794, Beatrice in 1796, and Silas in 1798. The family lived in a grand mansion overlooking the harbor, a testament to Elias's meteoric rise. For almost 20 years, the Fenwicks were the very picture of success and social standing. Isolde Fenwick remains something of an enigma in this story. Most accounts describe her as beautiful but reserved, rarely participating in the town's social events, despite her husband's prominence. Her father, Dr. Thorne, initially opposed the match, though his reasons were never explicitly stated in any surviving documents. A letter from Isolde's cousin Abigail to her sister in Portland hints at deeper concerns. Uncle Thomas fears there is something not right about the Fenwick fellow. He says he has seen the look in his eyes before, impatients who have made bargains with their own sanity. But Isolde is besotted and will hear no word against him. She claims he has promised her a life free from the hardships that claimed her mother. Isolde's mother had died in a house fire when Isolde was just 6 years old. Perhaps this shared experience of losing parents to tragedy created a bond between Isolde and Elias. Or perhaps, more disturbingly, it made her the perfect partner for what was to come. The Fenwick children grew up in luxury unimaginable to most Americans of the era. They had private tutors, fine clothes imported from Europe, and every advantage wealth could provide. Yet contemporaries noted something unusual about them as well. Gideon, the eldest, was described as naturally serious by his headmaster at Phillips Exeter Academy. Beatrice was known for her fascination with fire, constantly tending the hearth and staring into the flames for hours. Silas, the youngest, suffered from vivid nightmares that he would later describe in his medical diaries as visions of a world consumed by cleansing fire. But on the night of December 21st, 1812, the winter solstice, everything changed. A fire broke out in the Fenwick mansion. Witnesses described flames that seemed to move with unnatural purpose, burning blue and white rather than orange and red. By dawn, the magnificent house was nothing but cinders and ash. Among the ruins were found the charred remains of Elias and Isolde Fenwick. The official report called it a tragic accident, perhaps a candle left burning, or a log rolling from the fireplace. But there were whispers, as there always are in small towns. Some said they heard strange chanting coming from the house that night. Others claimed to have seen Elias standing at an upstairs window as the flames engulfed him, making no attempt to escape. His expression, one of grim acceptance. The most disturbing account comes from the Fenwick's housemaid, Maeve O'Malley. In a sworn statement to the town magistrate, she claimed that in the weeks leading up to the fire, Elias had been acting strangely. He would lock himself in his study for days at a time. He spoke of the approaching due date and the terms being satisfied. Most chillingly, she overheard him tell Isolde one evening, "The fire comes for us all in the end. It is the nature of our bargain." I managed to track down Maeve O'Malley's descendants, who had preserved a private memoir she wrote in her later years. In it, she elaborates on the events leading up to that fateful night. Mr. Fenwick began marking the days off on a calendar, each X made with such force that the quill sometimes tore through the paper. Mrs. Fenwick took to weeping at odd hours, though she would compose herself immediately if the children entered the room. 3 days before the fire, Mr. Fenwick called each child to his study separately. I could not hear what was said, but each emerged looking solemn. The next day, arrangements were suddenly made for all 3 children to be elsewhere on the night of the 21st. When I asked Mrs. Fenwick about this change in plans, she smiled a smile that never reached her eyes and said, "The children must live, Maeve. That is the most important thing. The children must live." Curiously, the 3 Fenwick children were not at home that night. Gideon, then 18, was away at university. Beatrice, 16, was staying with her maternal grandparents, and Silas, 14, was at a boarding school in Portland. All 3 Fenwick children survived, ensuring the family line would continue. And continue, it did. But what happened to the next generation of Fenwicks? That's where our tale becomes truly unsettling. Gideon Fenwick inherited his father's business and expanded it further. He married Lydia Beaumont in 1821, and they had 2 children, Elias II, named after his grandfather, and Rosalind. Gideon was known as a shrewd but fair businessman without the rumors of dark dealings that had surrounded his father. Yet Gideon's personal correspondence, which I discovered in the archives of the Massachusetts Historical Society, reveals a man haunted by his family's past. In a letter to his brother Silas, dated 1826, he writes, "I find myself calculating the years remaining to us. Father died in 1812. 20 years from then will be 1832. I look at my children, at my dear Lydia, and I wonder, do they sense it too? The inexorable approach of the flames? I have considered telling Lydia everything, but how does one begin such a conversation? My dear, I believe my family is cursed to die by fire." She would think me mad. Perhaps I am. Gideon's sister, Beatrice Fenwick, never married, devoting her life instead to charitable works. She established an orphanage in Philadelphia using her substantial inheritance. She died, you guessed it, in a fire that destroyed the orphanage on December 21st, 1832, the very same night as her brother. Remarkably, every child in the orphanage was safely evacuated. Only Beatrice perished. A newspaper account of the orphanage fire contains this telling detail. Miss Fenwick had, the very day before the tragic event, conducted a fire drill with all the children and staff. They were instructed with unusual precision on exactly how to exit the building and where to gather. When the actual fire broke out shortly after midnight, the children followed these instructions perfectly. Several reported that Miss Fenwick herself remained behind, standing in the central hall as the flames closed in around her. One child claimed that Miss Fenwick was holding a strange black ring and speaking to the fire itself. Silas Fenwick, the youngest of Elias's children, became a physician. He married Clara Sterling in 1826, and they had 3 children, Isolde, Alistair, and Julian. Silas was reportedly obsessed with his family history, collecting every document and artifact related to his father. According to his colleague, Dr. Alistair Sterling, Silas once confided that he was researching a way to break the chain. Silas's medical journals, preserved at the Johns Hopkins University archives, reveal a man desperately seeking scientific explanations for what he increasingly believed was a supernatural phenomenon. He conducted experiments with fire-resistant materials, studied cases of spontaneous human combustion, and even investigated ancient fire cults. In an entry dated June 1831, he writes, "I have consulted with a practitioner of the occult sciences against all my better judgments as a man of medicine. She examined Father's ring, which Gideon has entrusted to me for my research, and turned pale. She said it contains something that does not belong in our world, something that feeds on the moment of fiery transformation. When I asked if the curse could be broken, she would say only that what is bound by blood can only be unbound by blood. I fear I am running out of time to decipher this riddle." Whatever he discovered, it wasn't enough. Silas and Clara Fenwick died on December 21st, 1832, when their Providence home erupted in flames. All three of their children survived, having been sent to stay with Clara's sister the day before. A letter found in Silas's office, dated December 20th, read simply, "I have failed to find a solution. The price must be paid. Send the children away tomorrow. They must live to continue the search." Are you seeing the pattern yet? 3 siblings, all dying on the exact same night, exactly 20 years after their parents' death, all in separate cities, all in fires, all with their children mysteriously absent. But surely this is just a bizarre coincidence, right? Tragic, yes. Unusual, certainly. But nothing supernatural. That's what I told myself when I first uncovered this chapter of the Fenwick history. But then I traced the next generation. And the next. And the next. Elias Thect, Rosalind, Isolde, Alistair, Julian. All 5 cousins lived separate lives in different parts of the country. All 5 married and had children. All 5 died on December 21st, 1852. Again, exactly 20 years later, all in fires, all with their children safely away from home. I found a particularly detailed account of Rosalind Fenwick's death from the diary of her lady's maid. She describes how Rosalind had been plagued by nightmares in the weeks leading up to December 21st. Mrs. Chambers wakes screaming nearly every night now, clutching at her throat as if she cannot breathe. She speaks of dreams where she stands in a circle of blue fire, facing a figure made of smoke and ember. This figure reaches into her chest and pulls out a glowing coal, which it consumes. She says the pain is exquisite, both agony and ecstasy. I have urged her to see a doctor, but she only smiles sadly and says there is no cure for her condition. On the morning of December 21st, Rosalind sent her children to stay with her husband's parents, claiming they were planning a special Christmas surprise that required the children's absence. That evening, she dismissed all the servants except her lady's maid, who recorded, "Mrs. Chambers sat at her vanity, brushing her hair 100 strokes as she does every night. But tonight she spoke to her reflection as if it were another person entirely. I am ready," she said. "I have kept my part of the bargain. My children have prospered. They have never known hunger or fear. And now I pay the price." She then asked me to leave the house and not return until morning. I was reluctant, but she pressed a generous purse into my hands and said, "Please, this is how it must be." As I walked down the drive, I turned back once. Mrs. Chambers was standing at her bedroom window, silhouetted against the light. As I watched, the light behind her turned from yellow to blue, and then the whole room seemed to erupt in flames. This pattern repeats with mathematical precision through the generations. The surviving Fenwick children would live relatively normal lives for 20 years. They would marry. They would have children. And then, on the winter solstice, Exactly 20 years after their parents' fiery deaths, they too would perish in flames, having ensured their children were elsewhere. It's as if each generation knew exactly when and how they would die. As if they had inherited not just wealth, but a terrible knowledge and perhaps a terrible burden. I found journal entries, letters, and testimonials from Fenwick family members across the generations. Many express a grim resignation about their fate. Others document desperate attempts to break what some explicitly referred to as the curse or the compact. Beatrice Fenwick, writing in 1891, "I have consulted mediums, priests, and scholars. I have traveled to the far corners of the earth, seeking anyone who might help us escape our fate. But all roads lead back to the same conclusion. The debt must be paid. The fire must be fed. On December 21st, 1892, I have 10 months remaining." In her later entries, Beatrice describes visiting a temple in Nepal where the monks kept an eternal flame that allegedly contained a similar entity to the one bound to the Fenwick family. The head monk told her, "Fire is transformation. It is the bridge between states of being. Your ancestor made a pact with a being that exists in the moment of transformation, neither fully in our world nor fully outside it. It feeds on the energy released when a human life is consumed by flames, particularly lives that carry a certain bloodline. The more generations that pass through the fire, the stronger the entity becomes." Gideon Fenwick, in a letter to his wife dated 1908, "I've traced the black ring to an obscure cult in Eastern Europe. They claim it's one of 7 objects that can bind a deal with forces beyond our understanding. Elias Fenwick made such a deal, Lydia. He traded 20 years of prosperity for each generation, with payment due in fire. I'm close to understanding how to break it, but time grows short." Gideon's subsequent correspondence with occult scholars across Europe reveals fragments of a troubling story. Apparently, Elias Fenwick wasn't the first to make such a bargain. The black ring had changed hands many times throughout history, always following a similar pattern. A desperate individual would acquire it, make a pact, enjoy a period of prosperity, and then die in flames. What made Elias's case unique was that he somehow bound his descendants to the pact as well, creating a multi-generational covenant that was far more powerful and far more difficult to break. Silas Fenwick, journal entry from 1930. "Grandfather's papers confirm what I've long suspected. Elias didn't just make a deal for himself, he bound all his descendants. 20 years of guaranteed success and protection, then the fire comes. The children are spared to continue the cycle. I've left all my research in the hidden compartment beneath the library floor. Perhaps they will succeed where I have failed." Silas's research notes contain a fascinating theory about why Elias would have made such a bargain. During the year of Elias's disappearance, a severe famine struck much of New England. Many orphan children like Elias died of starvation or disease. Silas posits that Elias, faced with his own mortality and with no family to protect him, was the perfect target for an entity offering survival and prosperity in exchange for a delayed payment. But why bind his descendants? Silas writes, "I believe the entity required a greater payment for greater rewards. Elias didn't just want to survive, he wanted to thrive, to build a dynasty. And so he offered not just his own life, but the lives of generations of Fenwicks, yet unborn." The pattern held true through World War I, the Great Depression, World War II, and beyond. No matter where the Fenwicks were or what precautions they took, the fires always found them. One Fenwick couple died in a hotel fire in Rome, another in a forest fire in Colorado, a third when their car inexplicably burst into flames on a remote country road. One particularly eerie case was that of Alistair and Clara Fenwick, who died in 1912. They had become increasingly paranoid about their impending fate and built a house entirely of concrete and steel with no flammable materials whatsoever. They installed the most advanced fire suppression systems available at the time. On December 21st, they sealed themselves in a specially constructed safe room with walls of solid concrete 18 inches thick. The next morning, authorities broke into the safe room and found nothing but ash. The rest of the fireproof house was completely untouched. Always on December 21st, always exactly 20 years after their parents' deaths, always with their children safely elsewhere. The Fenwicks developed rituals around their fateful date. Many would hold family gatherings on December 20th, saying formal goodbyes to their children. Some wrote letters to be delivered to their children years later, explaining the family curse and preparing them for their own eventual fate. Others, like Julian Fenwick in 1932, tried to document the experience itself by setting up automatic cameras in their homes. The cameras were invariably destroyed in the fires, but Julian's son reported that one partially melted film strip showed a frame of his father seemingly conversing with a humanoid shape composed entirely of blue flame. The most recent confirmed case I could find was Gideon and Beatrice Fenwick, who died when their Baltimore apartment building caught fire on December 21st, 1972. Their son, Silas Fenwick, was staying with friends that night. What makes the Gideon and Beatrice case particularly unusual was the extraordinary effort they made to document their fate for their son. They left behind a steel safe containing detailed journals, family records, and even audio recordings explaining the Fenwick curse. The recordings, which I've had the privilege of listening to, include Gideon Fenwick's calm voice explaining, "Silas, if you're hearing this, then what we've told you has come to pass. We want you to understand that we did not choose this fate, but it chose us. What you do with this knowledge is your decision. You can run, as many Fenwicks have tried to do. You can fight, as others have attempted. Or you can accept and prepare, as most of us have done. But know this, the fire always finds its way to Fenwick blood." Beatrice's voice on the tapes is equally haunting. "My darling boy, I want you to know that these 20 years with you have been the greatest blessing of my life. I would endure this fate 1,000 times for the joy of being your mother. The prosperity the curse brings is real. You will never want for anything material. But the price is high, too high. I've begged your father to find a way to break this chain. But if you're listening to this, we have failed. I'm so sorry, Silas. So very sorry." The Baltimore Fire Department's report on the blaze that killed Gideon and Beatrice noted several anomalies. The fire appeared to have started simultaneously in multiple locations within the apartment. It burned at temperatures far exceeding normal residential fires, hot enough to melt portions of the building's steel support beams. And most tellingly, though the entire building was affected, the only fatalities were Gideon and Beatrice Fenwick. Every other resident managed to escape, many reporting that they were awakened not by smoke alarms, but by a sense of urgent dread that drove them from their beds moments before the fire spread to their units. Unlike previous generations, Gideon and Beatrice had only one child. Their neighbor reported overhearing a heated argument between them 3 years before their deaths. Beatrice was shouting, "We can't do this to another child. Isn't one sacrifice enough?" This suggests that the Fenwicks may have limited their family size deliberately, knowing the fate that awaited them and wishing to minimize the continuation of the curse. And this is where my research hit a wall. I could find no record of Silas Fenwick after 1978. It's as if he vanished. No death certificate, no marriage license, no property records, nothing. I spent months searching, following every possible lead. I checked missing persons reports, passport applications, property transfers, and tax records. I hired a private investigator who specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. All trails went cold around 1978 when Silas, then 24, withdrew all his money from his bank accounts and disappeared. And just when I was about to give up, I received an anonymous email. It contained only an address in a small town in Vermont, and the words, "If you want to know the truth about the Fenwicks, come alone on the winter solstice." The email came from an account that was created solely to send me that message, and was deleted immediately afterward. I tried to trace the IP address, but it had been carefully routed through multiple proxies. Someone didn't just want to remain anonymous. They were an expert at ensuring their digital footprint was untraceable. I'm not usually one to follow mysterious instructions from anonymous sources, but after 3 years of researching the Fenwick curse, I couldn't resist. So on December 21st, 2022, I found myself driving down a winding forest road toward a remote cabin. The cabin was deep in the Green Mountains, surrounded by towering evergreens that blocked most of the weak winter sunlight. It was a simple structure, well-maintained, but deliberately isolated. No neighbors for miles, no cell phone reception, just wilderness and silence. The man who greeted me was in his late 60s, with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much. He introduced himself simply as Silas. He invited me inside, and as we sat by a fire, yes, a fire, he told me the rest of the story. Silas Fenwick had spent his life running, not just from the curse, but from the Fenwick name itself. He had changed his identity, moved constantly, and never married or had children. He was trying to break the cycle, to end the Fenwick line with him. I was 19 when my parents sat me down and told me everything, Silas said, his voice raspy from years of disuse. At first I thought it was some kind of sick joke, but they had documentation, journals, letters, photographs, all showing the same pattern repeating through the years. They gave me a choice. I could accept the 20 years of prosperity that was my birthright, have children to continue the line, and then meet the flames on December 21st, 1992. Or I could run, hide, change my name, and never have children. I chose to run. Silas explained that the Fenwick curse came with benefits as well as costs. Each Fenwick would enjoy 20 years of uncanny good fortune, successful businesses, protection from illness and accident, a charmed life in every respect. But they would know exactly when and how that life would end. The curse isn't just about dying in fire, he told me. It's about continuing the line. Each generation must produce children to carry on the name, to feed the cycle. My ancestors understood this. They made sure their children were safe when the fire came, not just out of love, but out of obligation to the compact. According to Silas, Elias Fenwick hadn't made a deal with any ordinary entity. The being he encountered during that missing year was something ancient, something that fed on a very specific type of energy. The transitional moment when a human life is consumed by flames. The entity has many names in many cultures, Silas said. In some traditions, it's called the Firewalker. In others, the Ember King or the Ash Prince. It exists in the space between burning and burned, in the precise moment when matter transforms from one state to another through fire. It can't fully enter our world, but it can make bargains through certain objects, like the black ring my ancestor wore. My great-great-great-grandfather made a bargain, Silas said. 20 years of prosperity and protection for each generation, in exchange for a fiery death that feeds the entity. But here's the crucial part. The compact requires the continuation of the bloodline. Each generation must produce children who will eventually feed the flames themselves. Silas described how, over the decades, he had researched his family's curse while staying off the grid. He had traveled to obscure libraries, consulted with experts in the occult, and even visited sites where similar entities were said to be bound. He showed me notebooks filled with cramped handwriting, diagrams of arcane symbols, and photographs of ancient texts. Silas believed he had found a loophole. By refusing to have children, by ending the Fenwick line with himself, he thought he could break the cycle. For decades, he lived with this conviction. moving from place to place, always looking over his shoulder. But then, I realized something, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. I'm not the last Fenwick. Silas told me that his father, Gideon, had an affair years before Silas was born. This resulted in a child that Gideon never knew about, a half-brother to Silas named Daniel. Daniel had grown up with his mother's surname, unaware of his Fenwick heritage or the curse that came with it. He had children of his own who had children in turn, an entire branch of the Fenwick family tree, oblivious to their doom. I discovered this by accident, Silas said. I was researching my father's life, trying to understand if he had found any solutions that he hadn't shared with me. I found letters from a woman named Annalise Croft, claiming that her son was Gideon's child. My father apparently never saw these letters. They were returned unopened after my parents moved from their previous address. Silas spent years tracking down this unknown branch of the family. He found that Daniel Croft had married and had 2 daughters, one of whom, Clara, had married a man named Leo Vance and had 2 children of her own, all of them completely unaware of their Fenwick blood and the doom it carried. I've been tracking them, Silas said, trying to warn them, but they think I'm just a crazy old man. And now it's too late. According to Silas's calculations, the descendants of Daniel Fenwick were due to face the fire on December 21st, 2022, that very night. The curse is precise, Silas explained, 20 years after the previous Fenwick deaths. My parents died in 1972. Daniel, who never knew he was a Fenwick, died of natural causes in 1994. But his daughter Clara carries the blood. And tonight will be exactly 20 years since the last death in her direct line. Her grandmother, Annalise Croft, who died on December 21st, 2002. As if on cue, Silas's phone rang. He answered, listened for a moment, then looked at me with an expression of grim validation. It started, he said, a house fire in Bangor, the Vance family. Clara Vance was born Clara Croft, Daniel's daughter. We turned on the local news, and sure enough, there was breaking coverage of a major house fire in Bangor, just 3 hours south of our location. The reporters were saying that the fire had started suddenly and spread with unusual speed. Firefighters were battling the blaze, but the house was likely a total loss. Then came the update that made my blood run cold. 2 bodies had been found inside, Leo and Clara Vance. Their teenage children had been at a school event. The news report included interviews with neighbors, one of whom said, "It was the strangest thing. The flames were blue, almost white, and they moved like they had a mind of their own, forming shapes that looked almost human." Another neighbor mentioned that Clara had been acting strangely in recent days, like she knew something was coming. She had reportedly insisted that her children attend a school concert that evening, even though they had initially wanted to stay home. Silas looked at me, his eyes reflecting the flickering light from the fireplace. "It never ends," he said. "Unless..." He stood up and walked to a chest in the corner of the cabin. From it, he removed an old wooden box. Inside was a ring with a black stone, the same ring described in accounts of Elias Fenwick. "This is what binds us," Silas said. "This is the physical manifestation of the compact. I've spent my life researching how to break it, and I finally found the answer." The ring looked unremarkable at first glance. A simple band of dark metal with a black stone that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. But the longer I looked at it, the more unsettling it became. The stone seemed to have depth beyond its physical dimensions, as if I was looking into a bottomless well. And was it my imagination? Or did the air around it shimmer slightly, like heat rising from hot pavement? According to Silas, the entity that Elias Fenwick made his deal with could only be defeated by a willing sacrifice. A Fenwick who would choose to end the cycle by offering themselves to the flames without producing heirs. Not running from the curse, but facing it head-on. The entity feeds on fear, Silas explained, on the desperate struggle to escape the inevitable. My ancestors knew they would die, but they fought against it until the end. They made arrangements for their children, yes, but they never truly accepted their fate. I believe that if a Fenwick willingly gives themselves to the fire, without resistance and without continuing the bloodline, the compact can be broken. That's why I contacted you, Silas said. I need a witness, someone to tell the story, to warn any Fenwicks who might still be out there. The cycle can be broken, but only through sacrifice. I tried to talk him out of it. I suggested we look for other solutions, that we take the ring to experts. But Silas was resolute. I'm 70 years old, he said. I've lived my life in fear, always running. Tonight, I stopped running. He showed me a room at the back of the cabin, filled with research materials. Books, manuscripts, digital files. Take these, he said. Study them. Understand what we're dealing with, and then tell our story. As the evening wore on, Silas became increasingly calm, almost serene. He made tea, spoke of his life in hiding, and shared memories of his parents. They were good people, he said, caught in a trap set generations before their birth. They gave me every advantage they could, knowing they wouldn't live to see me grow up. Their last gift to me was the truth, however terrible. At precisely 11:45 p.m., Silas placed the ring on his finger, and the black stone seemed to swallow the light around it. The temperature in the cabin rose noticeably, though the fire in the hearth had died down to embers. Silas looked at me one last time. Leave now, he said. Tell our story. And if you ever meet another Fenwick, tell them there is a way out. I didn't want to go, but something in his eyes, a certainty, a peace, made me obey. I gathered the research materials he had given me and headed for the door. As I reached the threshold, I heard Silas begin to speak in a language I didn't recognize. Ancient words with harsh consonants and flowing vowels. The air grew thick with heat. I got in my car and drove about a mile down the road. That's when I saw the flames. The cabin was engulfed, the fire burning with that same unnatural blue, the same white color described by witnesses of the very first Fenwick fire over 200 years ago. I called 911, but I knew it was too late. Silas Fenwick had made his choice. The fire burned with impossible intensity. By the time emergency services arrived, there was nothing left of the cabin but a circle of ash. No structural remains, no personal effects, nothing. Just a perfect circle of white ash in the middle of an otherwise untouched forest clearing. The firefighters were baffled. One of them told me he'd never seen anything like it in 30 years of service. In the months since that night, I've been monitoring news reports of fires, obituaries, and public records. As far as I can tell, no one with the Fenwick name or bloodline has died in a fire. The cycle, for now at least, seems to be broken. I've been studying Silas's research materials, trying to make sense of the Fenwick curse and the entity behind it. Much of it corroborates what I had already discovered. But there are new details as well. References to similar cases throughout history, theories about the nature of the entity, and possible methods to bind or banish it. But I'm not taking any chances. This video, this account of the Fenwick family curse, is my testimony. It's my warning to anyone out there who might carry Fenwick blood, knowingly or not. And it's also a question to you, the viewer. What would you sacrifice for 20 years of guaranteed success? What price would you pay for protection from life's random cruelties? And if that price extended beyond your own life to the lives of generations yet unborn, would you still pay it? Elias Fenwick made his choice in 1791. His descendants paid for it with fire and blood for over 2 centuries. Silas Fenwick made a different choice in 2022. Only time will tell if his sacrifice truly broke the cycle. As I conclude this account, I find myself more cautious around open flames. I've removed the candles from my home. I've upgraded my smoke detectors. I've planned multiple escape routes from every building I regularly visit. Because if there's one lesson to be learned from the macabre history of the Fenwicks, it's this. Some bargains have terms that extend far beyond what we can imagine. Some prices are paid not just by us, but by those who come after us. And some fires, once lit, are nearly impossible to extinguish. This has been Julian Croft for 13th Hour Tales. If you found this account compelling, please like and subscribe for more explorations of the unexplained and the macabre. And if your last name happens to be Fenwick, perhaps reach out. We should talk. Wait, before I end this video, there's something I haven't told you. Something I discovered just yesterday. While going through Silas Fenwick's belongings, I found a journal hidden in a compartment beneath the floorboards. Most of it was burned beyond recognition, but a few pages survived. What I read there has kept me awake for the past 3 nights. According to Silas's research, the entity that Elias Fenwick made his deal with doesn't just demand fire. It demands a specific bloodline. The Fenwick name isn't just a family, it's a designation, a marker. Those who bear it are vessels for something else, something that has been passed down through the generations. Silas believed that the fire doesn't just kill the Fenwicks, it transforms them. Each fiery death releases something that then seeks out the next generation. The 20-year cycle isn't just about payment, it's about incubation. What exactly is incubating within the Fenwick bloodline? Silas's notes are fragmented, but he repeatedly mentions the ember and the seed of flame. He writes about dreams shared by Fenwick family members across generations. Dreams of a world consumed by fire, with themselves as the architects of the conflagration. In one partially burned page, Silas describes a theory that the entity is actually using the Fenwick bloodline to gradually adapt to our world. Each generation that passes through the fire strengthens the connection, allows the entity to infuse more of itself into the surviving children. The prosperity and protection that each Fenwick enjoys isn't just payment for their eventual fiery death, it's the entity's way of ensuring its chosen vessels thrive and reproduce. The most disturbing passage reads, "We are not cursed, we are chosen." Each generation burns to release what grows within us. But the final Fenwick will not burn. The final Fenwick will become the vessel for full manifestation. The entity grooms us, generation after generation, creating the perfect host. This suggests that the Fenwick curse isn't just a simple bargain. It's a long-term plan for something to enter our world. Each fiery death is not just feeding the entity, but preparing the bloodline for some final transformation. If Silas is right, and after everything I've learned about the Fenwicks, I'm inclined to believe him, then his sacrifice wasn't just about ending the cycle. It was about preventing something much worse from entering our world. But here's what keeps me up at night. In his final entries, Silas expresses doubt. He writes, "What if I'm wrong? What if my sacrifice doesn't end it, but merely delays it? What if the entity simply finds another family, another bloodline to groom? The compact may be with the Fenwicks, but the entity's hunger is eternal." I've started researching other families with histories of fire, other bloodlines with recurring patterns of tragedy. Because if Silas is right, the Fenwick story may be just one chapter in a much larger, much older narrative. There's a family in Arizona with 3 generations of deaths by wildfire. A clan in Scotland where every 3rd generation loses members to house fires. A Brazilian family where twins consistently die in flames. Are these just tragic coincidences? Or has the entity already found new vessels? The Arizona case involves the Valerio family, whose ranch has been struck by wildfires every 27 years since 1890. In each case, only family members die, while ranch hands and neighbors somehow escape unharmed. The Scottish clan, the MacLeods, have records dating back to the 1700s, showing that every 3rd generation, the eldest child of the family's main branch dies in a house fire on their 33rd birthday. And perhaps most disturbing is the case of the Silva family in Brazil, where for 6 generations, if twins are born into the family, both die in separate fires on the same day when they turn 21. I've started corresponding with researchers and family members connected to these cases. The patterns are different from the Fenwicks, but the underlying similarities are undeniable. The fires are always unusual, burning too hot, moving in unnatural ways, targeting specific individuals while sparing others. And in each case, there are whispers of an ancestor who made some kind of bargain, who acquired sudden wealth or success after a period of hardship or desperation. A MacLeod family diary from 1823 mentions an ancestor returning from a voyage to the Orient with a curious stone vessel that glows from within when blood is applied to its rim. A Valerio family legend tells of their first ancestor in America finding a fire spirit trapped in a canyon, which promised abundance for their cattle in exchange for the brightest flame of every 3rd generation. And the Silva twins phenomenon began after their great-great-great-grandfather, a struggling merchant, reportedly spent a night in an abandoned temple in the Amazon jungle and emerged with eyes that reflected firelight even in darkness. I'm beginning to believe that what we're dealing with isn't just one entity, but perhaps a class of beings, fire entities that exist partially in our world and partially elsewhere, seeking to fully manifest through human bloodlines. They offer prosperity in exchange for sacrifice, but their ultimate goal may be transformation and emergence through a perfected human vessel. As I compile these findings, I've noticed something else, something that may just be my imagination, but I've developed a strange fascination with fire. I find myself staring into candle flames, losing track of time. I've woken up twice now with my hands uncomfortably warm, as if I'd been holding them over a heat source. Last week, I caught myself sketching the same symbol over and over, a circle with what looks like a flame in its center. It matches a symbol found in Silas's notes, one he believed was the entity's true name written in some ancient script. And 3 nights ago, I had a dream. I was standing in a field, watching as the world burned around me. And in the dream, I wasn't afraid. I was satisfied, as if witnessing the fulfillment of a long-awaited promise. When I woke, there was a black smudge on my bedsheet, ash from a fire I don't remember lighting. I never met Elias Fenwick. I never made any bargain. But I spent 3 years immersing myself in the Fenwick family history. I handled their artifacts, including the ring. I was the last person to see Silas Fenwick alive. I wonder now if that was enough. I wonder if whatever was incubating in the Fenwick bloodline found a new host. I wonder if 20 years from now, on December 21st, 2042, the pattern will continue with me. This is Julian Croft, possibly signing off for the last time. If you're watching this in the future and you hear of my death in a fire, well, at least now you'll understand why. And if 20 years after that, you hear of a fire claiming the lives of my children I don't yet have and now fear to conceive, perhaps the cycle continues in a new bloodline. Perhaps the entity found a way to persist as entities of its kind always do. So I leave you with this final thought, this final warning. Be careful what you invite into your life. Be careful what you research, what you pursue, what you obsess over. Because some things, once given attention, never stop watching you in return. The flames dance in the darkness, consuming everything in their path. The old photograph curls at the edges, the faces of the Fenwick family slowly disappearing into ash. This is how it always ends. This is how it has always ended. And I fear this is how it will always begin again.